He laughed. Loud, shameless, arrogant. And everyone around laughed with him because they thought you were weak. But chosen one, you need to hear this now. Heaven saw everything when they clapped for his mockery, when they chuckled as he pointed fingers at you. Heaven was not silent. The court of angels stood still. The Spirit watched. You see, people think humiliation is the end. That being laughed at somehow means defeat. But what they don't understand is this. When God is involved, the story doesn't end where others want it to end. You stood there silent, still, burning, and yet not consumed, because your silence wasn't cowardice. It was consecration. You weren't silent because you didn't know what to say. You were silent because heaven told you to wait. You were carrying fire and didn't even realize it. They thought they won. They thought mocking you gave them power. But what they didn't know is that mockery always comes before manifestation. They didn't know you were chosen. You were never just another person in the room. You were a marked vessel, carrying divine purpose. And what they tried to humiliate, God is about to elevate. You felt it in your gut, didn't you? Something inside you said, "Don't speak. Just wait." That was not hesitation, that was divine restraint. That was the hand of God covering your mouth because he had something greater planned. And now, chosen one, the time of silence is over. The first sound you make will not be a defense, it will be a decree. Because you're not going to clap back with pride. You're going to speak with purpose. Let them laugh. Let them gather. Let them mock. Because heaven gathers too. And when heaven stands, no mocker can remain. You've been underestimated all your life. People called you too quiet, too soft, too weak. But the lion is not judged by how often it roars, only by the moment it strikes. And that moment is coming. You carry something sacred. That's why the enemy used a clown to distract you. That wasn't just a loud man trying to be funny. That was a spirit of arrogance trying to shame you out of your calling. He wasn't joking. He was jealous. He saw your future in the spirit and tried to humiliate it in the flesh. But you, chosen one, you didn't flinch. You felt the sting. You felt the shame. You may have even cried in secret later that night. But you did not break. And you need to know, heaven recorded it all. As we read in Isaiah 43, when you walk through fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. You walked through that fire. And yes, it hurt. But look at you, still standing, still anointed, still marked. Don't let that moment fool you. That wasn't your fall. That was your fire. And if you can survive the flame of public shame, you can carry the weight of public glory. Because something in you cannot die. Something in you cannot be mocked out of existence. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to please the crowd. You were sent to break patterns, shift atmospheres, and terrify demons simply by being alive. So don't mourn what they said. Don't replay their laughter. Don't let it echo in your spirit. Because while they laughed, heaven leaned in. While they clapped, angels marked the time. Because heaven doesn't move on applause, it moves on obedience. You didn't fight back, but God will. You didn't respond, but God is. You didn't need to prove yourself, because God is about to reveal you. That's why you're hearing this right now. This isn't coincidence. This is divine alignment. Heaven pressed pause on everything else just to tell you, I saw it. I've marked it. I'm about to flip it. So stand tall, straighten your crown, lift your head. You were never the joke. You were the assignment. And the very one who mocked you will one day have to confess the anointing they once ignored. If you know this was for you, comment below. 777, a number of divine completeness, spiritual fullness, and perfect timing. This is your signal to heaven. Type it in the comments if you're ready for the flip. He thought he had power because he had the crowd. He thought his jokes gave him dominion. But you and I both know mockery is the language of the insecure, chosen one. That moment was never really about you. He didn't even see you. What he saw was the light on your life. And that light triggered everything dark in him. You didn't threaten his pride, your presence did. Mockery is a mirror. It reveals more about the one mocking than the one being mocked. When someone carries a mocking spirit, it's because they're intimidated by something sacred that they don't understand. And the sacred thing in you, it terrifies the insecure. That's why he talked louder when you stayed quiet. That's why his sarcasm escalated when you didn't flinch. He needed the room to validate him. He needed laughter to feel strong. But needing the crowd is the very proof he's already lost the battle. Because you, chosen one, you didn't need backup. You didn't need the room. You didn't even need words. All you needed was the presence of God that walked with you silently through the fire. The louder he got, the clearer heaven saw. The more arrogant he became, the more exposed he became. He thought he was embarrassing you, but he was digging his own pit. You see, when a person mocks what God has marked, they step into dangerous territory. They are not mocking flesh, they're mocking assignment. They're mocking oil. They're mocking the one whom God has touched. And that always has consequences. Even David, anointed but not yet crowned, knew not to touch Saul, because the anointing must be respected. But the arrogant clown who stood before you had no such reverence. He was not wise enough to see that you were set apart. He treated your sacred as common. He treated your silence as weakness. And in doing so, he walked straight into judgment without even knowing it. God has always dealt with mockers. From the days of Elijah to the cross of Christ, there is a consistent pattern. Mockers may rise quickly. They may be loud. They may even gather followers, but they always fall hard. Because heaven does not tolerate the dishonoring of holy vessels. That moment where he ridiculed you in front of others was not harmless. It was recorded, and not by a phone, by the Spirit. Every word, every sneer, every laugh, it's been weighed. Not in your emotions, but in the courts of heaven. The ancient book of Proverbs warns us, whoever mocks the poor shows contempt for their Maker. And you may not be poor in possessions, but in that moment you were lowly quiet, restrained, vulnerable, and still he mocked. He didn't realize who he was talking to. He thought you were just one of them, just another face in the room. But you've never been just another face in the room. From your childhood, you've been different. You've noticed more, felt deeper, heard things others missed. You've always walked a line others couldn't see. Because you were never of the crowd. You were always called out from the crowd. He tried to drag you back into what God pulled you out of. He tried to label you with words God never spoke. But no matter how loud his mockery rang, it didn't erase the quiet word God whispered over your life. This moment wasn't just about someone making fun of you. It was about the enemy trying to assassinate your confidence before your confirmation. Because he knows what's coming. He knows what's in motion. He knows that once you step fully into your calling, his influence in that room, maybe even in that city, will be shattered. So he sent a clown. Loud, funny, arrogant, but spiritually blind. He underestimated the weight of glory on you. He couldn't see the oil. He couldn't see the angels. He couldn't see that you were born for a purpose that his jokes can never touch. You were tested in that moment, not in pride, but in patience, not in wit, but in restraint. And you passed. Because you didn't react, you responded within. And sometimes the most powerful answer is to say nothing while heaven prepares your defense. Even Christ stood silent before his accusers, and yet that silence carried the roar of resurrection. Paul reminds us in Ephesians 2, Luke, God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms. That's where you are. Even when mocked, even when ridiculed, you are not beneath them. You are seated above, in heavenly realms. You are not of the earth. You are sent to shift it. Let the mockers speak. Let them spend their breath, because the more they talk, the more room they give heaven to move. Their voice will fade, but your anointing will remain. Chosen one. Now we get to the truth behind his laughter. It wasn't just immaturity. It wasn't just a poor sense of humor. It was strategy. Spiritual strategy. Because darkness always uses mockery to try and silence destiny. You didn't just survive public humiliation. You endured a spiritual assault disguised as a joke. But here's what the mocker didn't know. God often lets his chosen be mocked before he reveals them. He lets Goliath speak first, so David's silence carries weight. When he said what he said, when the room erupted into laughter, you felt your stomach sink. You felt your hands shake, your throat tighten, your vision blur. You almost said something, but something greater stopped you. That wasn't fear. That was the Holy Spirit guarding the throne room inside you. Because what you carry isn't common, and when you're carrying something holy, God won't let you drop it for foolishness. You were being trained in that moment. Tested, watched, not by men, but by heaven. And though the room didn't recognize your restraint, God did. You've been given a gift most never understand. The ability to be still when the fire is hottest. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how divine it is to stay silent when every nerve in you wants to speak? Clap back and prove them wrong. But you didn't. Because you were born for something greater than applause. You were created not just to respond, but to rule. Every mocking word he spoke, it echoed back into the realm of the Spirit. And while others laughed, the atmosphere shifted. Something moved. He thought he was controlling the moment, but the moment had already been claimed. The heavens are not impressed by the noise of men. They are moved by the silence of those who trust. And that's what you did. Chosen one. You trusted. You stood there, absorbing it all but never bowing to it. That's what makes you different. You don't chase attention. You don't crave validation. Because you were already affirmed in secret long before you were attacked in public. It's always been like that, hasn't it? Even as a child, you were misunderstood. You spoke truth that others couldn't handle. You saw things before they happened. You felt heaviness no one else could explain. They laughed. Then, too, they called you too deep, too sensitive, too intense. But what they called too much, God calls necessary. That's why the enemy has always tried to use voices of mockery to shut you down. Not because you're weak, but because your voice carries weight. Because your words unlock doors. because your presence shifts realms. And he knows, if you ever step fully into who you are, no room will be able to contain you. So he sends clowns to keep you distracted. He sends sarcasm to keep you small. He sends shame to shrink your authority. But it's not working anymore. You're awakening. You're rising. You're beginning to remember who you are. You've been called, not to fight for a seat at the table, but to build your own. You've been marked not to impress the crowd, but to lead the remnant. You were never meant to entertain. You were sent to interrupt. That's why they mock. That's why they gather in groups, using jokes as weapons. Because there's something about your presence that makes demons tremble, and they'll use any host available to speak. It's not personal. It's prophetic. The resistance proves the oil. You see, the enemy doesn't attack empty vessels. He mocks what he fears, and he fears what you carry. He fears the word inside your bones. He fears the fire in your belly. He fears the stillness in your soul. He fears that if you ever realize who you really are, everything he's built will fall. So he sends loud voices to silence your destiny. But what he doesn't realize, you don't need to raise your voice to carry impact. You just need to stand. And that's exactly what you've done. Even now, heaven is preparing your answer. Not just for him, but for all who watched. Because when God vindicates, he does it publicly. He doesn't just restore, he reveals. He doesn't just respond. He reverses the mockery into momentum. And that's what's about to happen. This isn't just a recovery. This is a rise. And it won't be quiet for long. You've been silent long enough. But when you speak, the room will shake. When you move, the atmosphere will shift. When you act, it will be undeniable that God is with you. And for every mocker who clapped when you were silenced, they will sit in silence when God elevates you. It was declared in Luke 10, "Shizyo, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you." Type this in the comments if you feel it rising in your spirit. I hear you. It started as laughter, but something in the room shifted. You felt it, didn't you? The temperature changed. The air got thick. He was still talking, still smirking, still pulling laughs from the shallow-hearted, but beneath the noise, a storm was rising. Not outside, within you. Because, chosen one, mockery doesn't just sting, it awakens. What was once buried deep inside you began to stir. A memory, a calling, a moment you didn't expect to relive. He wasn't the first to mock you, not by far. This goes back years. Classrooms, workplaces, family tables. They laughed at how you saw the world. They rolled their eyes when you shared your dreams. They told you to lighten up, be normal, stop being so intense. But none of them understood the weight on your life. And deep down, you started to believe them. You started shrinking your language, withholding your vision, lowering your volume, not out of peace, but out of pressure. But then it happened again. This moment, this mocker, this crowd, and something broke. You stood still on the outside, but the chains of false humility snapped inside your soul. Because when mockery becomes a pattern, heaven eventually calls time on it. You've suffered long enough in silence, not because you're weak, but because you were waiting. Not because you lacked a voice, but because you were waiting for heaven to authorize it. Now the fire is no longer buried. Now the oil is rising. Now the old lies are losing their grip. You thought you were just enduring, but you were transforming. When a clown mocks a child of God, it becomes more than disrespect. It becomes a catalyst. And that's what this moment is, your catalyst. This is when things change. Not out there, not in them, but in you. You're starting to remember not just who you are, but why you are. You're not just chosen, you're sent. You're not just called, you're armed. This mocker may never know it, but he accidentally activated something that hell has been trying to bury for years. He stirred the sleeping lion, and heaven took notice. Sometimes God will allow mockers a microphone, just so he can use them as a mirror. They reveal who you're not and who you're about to become. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not too much. You are not crazy. You are marked. You are set apart. You are full of something they cannot name because it came from a place they've never been. There's a moment before every move of God where mockers get loud. Before Jesus raised the girl from the dead, the crowd laughed. Before Nehemiah finished the wall, Sanballat mocked. Before David took the throne, Saul hunted him and slandered his name. And now, here you are standing in a similar moment, different century. Same strategy. The mockers have gathered. The crowd is watching. But heaven is loading something into your spirit that can't be denied much longer. You didn't ask for the spotlight, but it's about to find you, not for your glory, but for God's demonstration. Because there is an entire generation watching how you respond. They've seen arrogance win. They've seen mockery rewarded. But what they haven't seen, what they need to see, is what holiness looks like when it finally speaks. And that, chosen one, is where this is headed. Your voice won't rise in vengeance, it will rise in victory. You won't retaliate. You will reveal. You won't strike back. You will stand forth. There's a difference, and heaven knows it. That's why the Spirit has been tightening your circle. That's why you felt isolated. That's why nothing normal satisfies you anymore. You've been in hiding, not because you're lost, but because you're being preserved. And every mocking word thrown at you has only confirmed the timing of your release. Let them say what they want. Let them misunderstand. Let them mislabel. God has a way of exalting the very one they tried to erase. There is fire in your story. Chosen one. And it's not just meant to keep you warm, it's meant to light others up. The time is coming. Your moment is near. And when it arrives, the same mouths that mocked will fall silent. Not because you silenced them, but because God did. This has never been about revenge. It's been about revelation. And soon, very soon, who you really are will be impossible to ignore. You didn't plan it. You didn't prepare a response. But when the atmosphere shifted, when the weight in the room pressed down on your spirit, you felt something new. Something you hadn't felt before. Not anger. Not fear, authority. You stood there, and something inside you whispered, "This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your unveiling." The mocker was still talking. The crowd was still chuckling, but something in the spirit realm had changed. It was no longer about you and them. It was about what God was about to do through you. In front of them, God is patient, but he is not passive. When his chosen are dishonored publicly, he doesn't react like man. He responds like a king. Measured, strategic, final. And so there you stood, one person, against a room filled with noise. But heaven doesn't count numbers. Heaven measures weight, and your silence that day, it was heavier than all their laughter combined. People may forget moments, but atmospheres don't. That room will never forget the shift. even if they can't explain it. They felt it. Because when a chosen one is insulted but doesn't retaliate, it disturbs the natural order. Mockery is expected. Stillness, that's spiritual. And stillness always signals the presence of God. You may not realize it, but you've already begun to walk in a new level. You've shifted realms without even announcing it, because God is the one lifting you now. You don't need a platform. He's becoming your platform. Let them continue to overlook you. Let them think you're still the version of yourself they once saw. God has hidden your growth for a reason, because He is about to reveal it with fire. And chosen one, this fire isn't just for you. It's for every person who's ever been mocked in silence. For every young David hiding in the shadows. For every Esther who's been quiet too long. Your rise will ripple. Your restoration will resonate. This is why the mocker came so strong. He wasn't just mocking you, he was trying to stop a movement. But he failed. And here you are still standing, still marked, still chosen. Your journey has not been easy. You've lost things no one knows about. You've cried tears behind doors. People thought you closed in peace. But the anointing you carry was never cheap. It was purchased in pain, paid for in patience. And now, it's about to be poured out. You are the kind of person God uses to shift culture, not because you're loud, but because you've been through enough fire to carry weight when you speak. Heaven is preparing to place you where your name hasn't even been spoken yet. Because elevation isn't always about visibility, it's about assignment. And your assignment is growing. Whether they approve or not, whether they applaud or not. If you've ever needed confirmation that your pain had purpose, this is it. That moment of mockery wasn't wasted. It was recorded, and now it's being reversed. There is an anointing on your life to speak into dry places, to walk into rooms and shift what people thought was settled, to open your mouth and cause silence to fall, not by force, but by authority. You're not just a voice, you're a vessel. And the more surrendered you become, the stronger the outpour will be. If this resonates with your spirit, consider doing something bold today. Let this message continue to reach others who are walking through the fire right now. Click like if your spirit feels the weight of this truth. Share this message because someone else is quietly enduring what you've already overcome. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because your journey is not done. And if you feel led to support this movement, I know that every seed sown helps this message find the next chosen one who needs it. No pressure, just obedience. The link is below. Because this isn't about a video, it's about a divine moment. And divine moments require divine alignment. Heaven is speaking. Heaven is confirming. And heaven is building something through your obedience that mockers will never understand. Isaiah 54:17 declares, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment, you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord." You are not defenseless. You are not uncovered. You are not forgotten. You are His. And when you belong to the King, even the whispers of mockers must bow. Their words will pass, but your anointing will remain. Their laughter will fade, but your rise will echo. Stay anchored. Stay ready. Because what comes next is bigger than personal vindication. It's divine revelation. It didn't happen all at once. The shift was subtle at first. But something in the spirit world changed the moment he went too far. He thought he was just being funny. He thought the crowd was his shield. But arrogance has a way of pushing past invisible lines And this time, chosen one. He crossed one. There are things God permits, moments He allows to humble us, stretch us, refine us. But there are other moments when even heaven says, enough. And in that instant, though no one else saw it, you felt it. A tightening in your chest, a silence in your soul, as if time paused, and heaven leaned closer. It wasn't anger, it was judgment. Not yours, God's. Because this wasn't just a man speaking carelessly. This was a spirit trying to curse what heaven has called blessed. And curses always backfire when spoken against the chosen. There's something sacred about the moment, just before God responds. It feels still, but it's not empty. It feels silent, but it's full of fire. And in that stillness, something happened inside of you. Not a thought, not an emotion, a knowing. You didn't need to prepare a clapback. You didn't need to prove your intelligence. You didn't even need to defend your dignity, because God Himself had already stood up on your behalf. There are some moments where your obedience becomes your greatest weapon, and your silence in the face of mockery became a divine megaphone, because the same crowd that laughed began to shift. Some kept laughing, but others paused. They felt the air change. They couldn't explain it, but they felt it. Their spirit picked up what their minds didn't understand. You were not alone, and you were no longer standing as just a person. You were standing as a vessel, chosen one. Don't underestimate what happened in that moment. The enemy overplayed his hand, and now the consequences are unfolding, because when arrogance keeps speaking, eventually it collides with divine boundaries. Heaven lets mockers run until they hit a wall, and that wall isn't man-made. It's spirit-built, invisible to human eyes, but undeniable in weight. This man, this mocker, wasn't just trying to embarrass you. He was being used to block a gate of influence in your life. But when he spoke too much, when he crossed that line, the gate unlocked, and now, what was once held back is being released. This is why you've been in the fire, why you've felt hidden, why the warfare has intensified, because the moment of release is never quiet. It's always challenged, always mocked, always attacked, until the attack becomes a setup for something greater. You are stepping into a season where mockery turns into momentum, where dishonor becomes a doorway, where shame becomes fuel, where laughter becomes proof that the anointing is increasing. Let this mark you. The people who laughed are not your enemy. The spirit behind their laughter is, and that spirit knows what's coming, because spirit can sense destiny before people do. And the more the enemy mocked, the more he revealed how close you are. You've been one breath away from breakthrough, and now the breath of God is blowing again, not to scatter you, but to send you. Mockery is the sound right before manifestation, and in the silence of your obedience, something ancient has been stirred, something powerful, something that only emerges under pressure. Esther wasn't revealed until the threat was public. Joseph wasn't elevated until he endured mockery in Potiphar's house and prison. Jesus wasn't glorified until they stripped him, spit on him, and called him a fraud. But what man mocks, God magnifies. And what they tried to tear down in you is the very thing God is about to put on display. If this word is confirming what you've already felt in your spirit, don't ignore it. Heaven's timing is not random, and your silence has not been empty, it's been pregnant with purpose. This mocker, he didn't just trigger a moment, he triggered a movement. And whether he knows it or not, God used his arrogance to make room for your arrival. You are being summoned, not by man, but by the Spirit of the living God. And when God calls a soul into its assignment, no sarcasm, no slander, no smile of mockery can cancel it. Heaven has already overruled the joke. And now, elevation is unfolding behind the scenes. Paul said it best in Romans 8. Sheba, the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed in us. Type 999 in the comments, 3 digits to declare that a cycle has ended. And what was meant to bury you will now break open a new dimension. There are moments in life where words are not born in the mind, they are breathed by heaven. What happened next was not rehearsed. It wasn't clever. It wasn't poetic. It was prophetic. Because what rose in your spirit wasn't just a response, it was a divine decree. The room was still, the crowd frozen between curiosity and discomfort. The mocker, oblivious to the weight of what he had stirred, still smirked until you opened your mouth. And chosen one, what you spoke wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it cut through the atmosphere like thunder wrapped in silence. Because what comes from the throne does not need volume to carry authority. It needs truth. And truth was what came out of you. It wasn't about the words, it was the spirit behind them. You didn't speak to win the room. You didn't speak to change their minds. You spoke because heaven gave you utterance. What you said wasn't just heard, it was felt. It had weight. It had alignment. And every syllable struck the unseen realm with surgical precision. The mocker's face changed. The smirk faded. Confusion settled in where arrogance had stood. Because he had expected a verbal brawl, but what you delivered was a spiritual blow. And everyone knew it. There are moments when God doesn't wait for applause. He moves through a vessel and lets the silence that follows confirm his presence. You became that vessel. What left your mouth came from a place beyond offense. It came from obedience. And obedience carries glory. You didn't insult. You didn't match his tone. You spoke as one who has seen something, carried something, survived something. And that's what shook the room. Not your words, but your witness. Because you stood there with scars the crowd couldn't see. You stood there with oil they didn't recognize. You stood there still, but full. Still, but sent. Still, but burning. And your presence became a sermon no mocker could silence. Chosen one. It is no small thing to be trusted with such a moment. Many would have missed it. Many would have fired back with sarcasm, or fury, or pride. But you didn't. Because something in you has changed. You've been trained in secret, prepared in pain, matured in isolation. And when the moment came, what flowed from you wasn't reaction, it was revelation. The crowd didn't understand all of it, but they felt it. They felt the shift, the tension, the clarity. It was like the air had been pierced by something ancient, and it had, because when a chosen vessel speaks at heaven's prompting, time itself bends. That room was no longer just a room. It became a sanctuary. And your words, few though they were, rang like temple bells through the spirits of those who had ears to hear. Some in the crowd looked down. Some exchanged glances. Some didn't know why they suddenly felt uneasy. It's because your words weren't just heard by flesh. They were witnessed by spirits. And every mocking voice that had joined the chorus suddenly found itself silent. Not because you humiliated them, but because heaven intervened. This is how God moves when he defends his own. He doesn't send armies, he sends truth through vessels. And chosen one, became that vessel. You didn't plan it. You didn't ask for it. But your obedience made room for it. What came out of your mouth was so much more than words. It was a line drawn in the spirit. It was a sound of separation, the dividing moment between what was and what is now being birthed. You felt the shift inside too, didn't you? The moment it left your lips, something broke. Not in them, in you. The weight you'd been carrying, the pressure of silence, the ache of restraint, it lifted, and in its place came peace. Not the kind that comes from being liked, but the kind that comes from being aligned. This is how elevation begins. Not with announcements, but with obedience. Not with parades, but with purpose. Not with revenge, but with release. God is not just elevating your name. He is establishing your voice. Not to clap back, but to carry authority in places mockery once dominated. That moment was not the climax. It was the unlocking. And what has been unlocked in you is only beginning. There are rooms that will now open without invitation. There are ears that will now listen without interruption. Not because of who you are in their eyes, but because of who you became in that moment. You are walking proof that God does not need numbers to make impact. He needs alignment. And when you stood up, not in pride, but in posture, you became the answer to prayers you didn't even know were prayed. The kingdom has always moved through the unlikely, and now you know why you've been through what you've been through. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. So that when the moment came, you would carry the voice, not the wound. You are no longer reacting to pain. You are responding from power, and that, chosen one, is what no mocker can copy, counterfeit, or cancel. The silence after you spoke was unlike anything that came before it. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It was holy. Because when heaven speaks through a vessel, even the air holds its breath. The mocker, once so confident, now stood frozen. His eyes moved, searching for an escape, some validation, a chuckle from the crowd. But it never came, because something in your voice, not your tone, not your volume, but your weight made laughter impossible. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't about words. This was about presence. Something had entered the room that no one could deny. It wasn't charisma. It wasn't intimidation. It was the glory of God showing up in stillness, in fire, in you, chosen one. Do not underestimate what was broken in that moment. Mockery may have looked like the battle, but this has always been a war of altars. And when you opened your mouth, you didn't just speak. You tore down something. You dismantled arrogance. You shattered the spirit of distraction. You broke the agreement that said you had to stay quiet, to stay safe. There are spiritual dynamics. No one talks about realities that exist behind the scenes. Most people move through life unaware of what governs the atmosphere. But you are different. You've always been able to sense what others ignore. And in that moment, your spirit didn't just respond to the man, it responded to what was behind the man. You weren't confronting a person, you were confronting a principality. And by speaking when heaven said speak, you displaced it. It wasn't a debate. It was a dethroning. That's why the atmosphere shifted. That's why the room froze. That's why his face changed. Because spiritual authority cannot be faked, and when it shows up, it silences what is false. You've always carried something different. That's why the warfare has been so personal. That's why rejection has followed you since childhood. That's why your quietness has been misunderstood, and your fire mistaken for pride. But now it's being revealed. What they mocked is what heaven marked. You didn't pray for this. You didn't push for this. But the fire in your life is undeniable, because it was forged in places no one else survived. You are not just gifted, you are refined. You are not just called, you are ready. There's a difference between people who talk and people who have been sent. You didn't climb for the mic. You were given the mantle. And the proof is in what happened the moment you spoke. The room was not the same. The people were not the same. You were not the same. Some may try to pretend the moment passed. Some may try to return to normal. But something eternal entered that space, and no one who stood in it walked away untouched. The mocker may never apologize. He may pretend he wasn't affected. But what he encountered was not you, it was what you carry. And when someone comes face to face with real authority, they're never quite the same again. God used your obedience to expose what had been hiding in plain sight. That spirit of pride had ruled rooms for far too long. It laughed at the weak. It elevated the loud. It silenced the called, but not anymore. You exposed it by simply being true to your assignment, by not shrinking, by not retaliating, by standing in the fullness of who God made you to be. And that is what the enemy fears most. Not noise, but alignment. Because when a chosen one becomes aligned, they don't just impact moments, they change entire environments. Do you know what heaven was doing while you stood there? It was shifting things, lifting limits, opening doors. Not because you fought for them, but because you stood for Him. That's what separates you. Not your ability to fight back, but your refusal to bow down. Not your desire to be seen, but your willingness to be sent. You don't need to prove anything. Your presence already declares everything. That God's hand is on you. That your life is not random. That your words have weight. That your assignment is active. What happened in that room wasn't just for that room. It echoed beyond it. Because obedience always multiplies in impact. And now the seed has been planted, not a seed of revenge, but of revival. Because the people who witnessed that moment saw something real. And real always creates hunger. Some might deny it. Others may dismiss it. But deep in their spirits, they know what they felt. Because the word of God never returns void. And you didn't just speak words. You released His word, and His word remains. Psalm 29:4 says, "The voice of the Lord is powerful, the voice of the Lord is full of majesty." That's what echoed through your voice. Majesty. Not performance, not pride, but majesty. And that chosen one is why the atmosphere broke open. Because when majesty enters the room, everything that's false must bow. You didn't plan to shake the room. You didn't arrive expecting to shift atmospheres or silence spirits. But when heaven speaks through obedience, even the ordinary becomes holy ground. The moment your words fell, it wasn't just about you anymore. It was about everyone watching. Because God didn't just use you to respond, He used you to reveal. Every person in that space felt it. Some denied it. Some looked away. But no one could pretend it didn't happen. The mocker, now disarmed and unsure, had nothing left to say. He realized too late that he hadn't just mocked a person, he'd mocked a presence. And that presence answered back without rage, without shouting, without violence, just truth. And truth does not negotiate. It confronts. It divides. It delivers. The ones who once laughed began to feel convicted. Not condemned, but convicted. Because when God shows up, even the hardest heart softens in his shadow. You felt it too, that something larger than yourself had spoken. You were just the vessel, but the power behind your obedience was him. And this is what the world forgets. God doesn't always speak through fire and earthquakes. Sometimes he speaks through one still voice in a crowd of noise. That's what you became. Not a voice of pride, but a piercing wind of clarity. Some people watched you in awe. Not because of you, but because of what moved through you. They had seen arrogance dominate for so long. They forgot what true authority looked like. But in that moment, they remembered. Their spirits recognized the weight. And here's the mystery. When one chosen vessel stands in alignment, it awakens something in the ones watching. It reminds them of who they are. It reminds them of what they've ignored. It shakes them out of compromise and into conviction. You didn't just silence the mocker. You activated a room. That's why your words lingered in the silence. They didn't vanish, they planted. They went into the hearts of everyone listening, and they began to break old agreements. Agreements of fear, agreements of shame, agreements of hiding. You spoke once, but heaven echoed it into many, because that's how spiritual authority works. It doesn't shout, it spreads. It doesn't push, it permeates. And that's what your obedience did. You stood in a room where darkness was comfortable and made it uncomfortable. You didn't perform. You didn't entertain. You simply stood in truth. And truth did what only it can do. Set captives free. Some will never tell you what they felt. They'll pretend they weren't moved. But deep inside, your words unlocked something. A memory, a longing, a calling. You reminded them, without even trying, what it feels like to be near the presence of God. That's why the atmosphere changed. Not because of your title, not because of your training, but because of your alignment. And alignment always carries impact. It shifts environments. It awakens sleepers. It confronts systems. It invites glory. You may not have seen the change immediately, but heaven sees further than time. Your obedience planted seeds that will grow in silence, in private, in places you'll never walk, but places your obedience already touched. You are not ordinary. You never were. That's why the enemy used mockery. He knew he couldn't kill your calling, so he tried to humiliate it. But now the humiliation has been reversed. Now the voice of arrogance has been silenced, and the ones who once overlooked you now sense what was always there. Weight, presence, authority. This is why your silence carried more than sound, because it came from a place of fire, and fire always makes the room choose. Run or be refined. Some will run, but others will follow, because they saw something that cannot be faked. And when heaven touches a life, even the blind begin to notice. Let this be your confirmation. That moment wasn't just a response, it was a revelation of who you are, of what you carry, of why the enemy has tried to keep you small. You are not just called to speak, you are called to shift, and you've already started, not by force, but by fire. Jeremiah 23:29 says, "Is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces?" That's what your voice became. A flame, a hammer, a reminder that silence led by God is louder than any crowd led by ego. If something in your spirit just said yes, comment below. Speak, "Lord, let it be your quiet agreement that you're ready to hear." ready to move, and ready to carry what heaven is saying. They looked at you differently after that. Not because you tried to change their perception, not because you raised your voice or demanded respect, but because the weight of your obedience changed the atmosphere, and when the atmosphere changes, so does the lens through which people see. The ones who laughed now watched you with a strange silence. Some were uneasy. Others were thoughtful. A few convicted in ways they couldn't even explain. It wasn't that you became someone new in that moment. It's that they finally saw who you've been all along. Chosen one. You didn't just survive the moment, you shifted the narrative. And it wasn't by strategy or strength. It was by spirit. Because God doesn't need performance to reveal purpose. He only needs alignment. And you, whether you realized it or not, stepped into alignment when you refused to bow to the mockery. That's when heaven stepped in. That's when what was unseen became undeniable. It's easy to think nothing changed because the room went quiet. But quietness after glory is never empty. It's reverence. You became the doorway. Heaven used to break years of tolerated arrogance. You didn't just speak, you interrupted a pattern. There are some people who have carried pride for so long that they believe it's strength. There are rooms where sarcasm has become a substitute for discernment. There are systems where mocking is normal, but you were never made to fit into what was normal. You were made to confront it by simply being true. And now, because of your surrender, people who once saw you as invisible are being forced to acknowledge something they cannot explain. They won't say it aloud. Not yet. But their spirit knows, and the spirit never lies. That's the power of a life fully surrendered. It doesn't chase influence. It becomes influence. The man who mocked you may forget his words, but he'll never forget your response. He won't forget the stillness that followed. He won't forget the weight he felt in the room, because heaven's glory leaves marks on moments. And you, chosen one, have just stepped into a new level of visibility, not for your ego, but for His glory. Don't be surprised when people begin to treat you differently, not because of something you said, but because of what you carry. You didn't demand honor, but heaven has commanded it. There are some moments that act as divine announcements. You don't need to say, "I'm chosen." The evidence begins to speak for itself. And now, the evidence is undeniable. The same room that once overlooked you now carries the memory of your voice. The same crowd that once laughed now feels a pause in their spirit when your name is mentioned, because something holy walked into that moment. And holiness never leaves without leaving a mark. You may not have asked for it. You may not have even wanted it. But God chose to reveal Himself through your stillness. And now that you've been seen, you will never be unseen. This is where things shift. Not just for the room, not just for the mocker, but for you. Because once you step into public purpose, there's no going back to private hiding. The weight you carry is now active. And with it comes responsibility, but also favor. Doors will open. Conversations will shift. Hearts will soften. Not because of you, but because of the God who moves through you. Psalm 75:7 says, "It is God who judges. He brings one down. He exalts another." You didn't promote yourself. You were exalted by obedience. And now, your story is becoming a testimony. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever stayed silent, hidden, restrained, wondering if God would ever speak for them. He just did, through you. And now others will be strengthened by your stand. So don't be ashamed of the moment. Don't replay the pain. Don't shrink back from the weight. You were built for this. You were called for this. And everything the enemy tried to mock in you is now becoming your mantle. There are people across the world going through similar battles. People silenced. People overlooked. People mocked. Let your story reach them. Click like to keep this message moving. Share it with someone who's been fighting to keep their voice steady in the face of mockery. Subscribe if you haven't, because this is only the middle. God is still speaking. And if you feel led, consider supporting this work so more chosen voices can be lifted and more hidden warriors can be found. Every gift strengthens this mission. No pressure, just purpose. This isn't entertainment. It's alignment. It's restoration. It's the reawakening of those who have felt forgotten, laughed at, dismissed. But God never forgot you. And now, He's putting you in places where the very ones who laughed will witness His hand on your life. Stay grounded. Stay pure. Stay ready. Because what was mocked is now being magnified, and what was overlooked is now overturning systems. The glory on your life is not just rising, it's resting. Let it rest. Let it speak. Let it lead. God took over the narrative. That's the only way to explain it. What began as mockery became a message. A moment you didn't ask for became the turning point of the entire room. But not just the room, your life. Because something greater than you took the pen from mockery's hand and began to write a new chapter. Chosen one. You didn't shift the story by force. You surrendered to something greater, and the story rewrote itself around your obedience. This is what happens when God gets involved. He doesn't just vindicate, He reclaims. He doesn't just defend your name, He reshapes the narrative so that the very place of dishonor becomes the stage for divine revelation. The mocker had his moment. His voice had its echo. His sarcasm carried in the air for a time. But heaven was waiting for the right second, the divinely measured pause, to insert truth that could not be denied. And He chose you as the instrument. You didn't fight for it. You didn't even ask for it. You simply stood in it, and in doing so, you triggered something ancient, something spiritual, something heaven had prepared long before that man ever opened his mouth. This moment was not just a turning point in public, it was a realignment in the spirit. Because when God steps in, He not only silences the voices against you, He elevates the voice within you. You know now, don't you? This has never been about proving yourself. That's why it never worked when you tried to explain. That's why it always fell flat when you tried to defend. Because God wasn't calling you to explain your calling, He was calling you to embody it. And now, through a single moment of restraint and obedience, the message is loud and clear. People see it now. They don't have language for it yet. They might say things like, "You changed," or "There's something different about you." But what they're really saying is, "I can feel what you carry now." Because what you carry is no longer hidden. You didn't pray for this spotlight. You never asked to be the one chosen in the fire. But that's the mystery of heaven. It chooses whom it pleases, and it refines them until they can be trusted to carry glory without ego. And that's who you're becoming. A vessel refined in silence, chosen through pressure, crowned not through public praise, but through private surrender. This shift you felt, it's not just emotional, it's spiritual. You've crossed a line. You've stepped out of obscurity and into revealed purpose. And the proof is in the way people respond to you now. Some avoid eye contact. Some keep their distance. Some seem nervous when you speak. It's not personal. It's prophetic. They're sensing something they never saw before. They're feeling something they can't explain. Because glory doesn't need announcement, it speaks for itself. And the most sacred part of all this, God didn't just change their view of you, He changed your view of yourself. You now know that you were never weak for staying silent. You were wise. You were guarded. You were under authority. And now that your release has come, you no longer need to shrink to make others comfortable. That moment didn't just shut down mockery, it opened your mouth for the right reasons, the right season, the right people. From here on, every room you enter will remember that stillness, not because of fear, because of reverence. You carry something that is not loud, but it is undeniable, and it leaves a mark without a word. God has taken over the narrative. What others once called weak now carries the weight of divine wisdom. What once felt like rejection now looks like protection, because you see clearly now. You see that heaven was always building this moment. Every hidden season, every unseen battle, every unanswered prayer, it all led to this. And now, not only have you survived mockery, you have transcended it. This is the place of separation, where God pulls you out of the familiar, not to punish, but to position, not to isolate, but to elevate. And while the mocker remains stuck in the cycle of noise, ego, and validation, you have been set in a new place, a place where your words no longer echo just in air but in eternity. Because when God reclaims a narrative, He doesn't just change your image, He changes the impact. And the people who once laughed will now listen, not because they suddenly respect you, but because they can't deny the one who speaks through you. Let that settle in your soul. This was never about personal victory. This was always about divine authority. And you now carry it, not as a badge, not as a trophy, but as a mantle, and it is resting on you. Even now, he left speechless, not just Kiet stripped. His mouth, once full of clever lines and arrogant jabs, now held nothing. Naributal, no sarcasm, no defense, because what you carry, chosen one, is not something words can debate. It is something spirits recognize and bow to. He didn't walk away defeated by you. He walked away disarmed by God. And that's the difference. You didn't embarrass him, heaven exposed what had no authority to speak. Mockers always believe the room belongs to them, until presence enters. And when true presence enters, when the Spirit of the Lord decides enough is enough, no ego can stand. And that's what happened. He was allowed to speak first, but God always speaks last. What you witnessed wasn't just a person losing a moment. It was the stripping of a spirit that had long gone unchallenged. That's why the moment felt deeper than words, because it was the silence that followed wasn't tension. It was completion. The mocking had met its limit. The pride had run into divine boundaries. The clown show had been cancelled by glory. And now, everything is different. People didn't clap. There was no applause. No dramatic outburst. Because when God shuts a mouth, even the boldest become small. And not in shame, in awe, in sudden recognition that something greater is present. Chosen one. Your obedience became a weapon. Your stillness became a sword. And your voice, used at the appointed moment, became a verdict. Final, sharp, righteous. What they saw as you biting your tongue was actually God positioning you for a divine verdict. You weren't holding back. You were holding authority. And when the time came, that authority was released. It wasn't your power that silenced him. It was your surrender. That's why the air shifted. That's why his shoulders sank. That's why his voice faded. Because when surrender meets timing, God speaks. And when God speaks, every other voice must make room. He left that place not just embarrassed, he left marked. He had touched what was holy, and he knew it. Whether he ever admits it or not, something in him encountered a realm he'd never known. And the fear he now feels is not of you, it's of the one who defends you. This is why it matters that you stayed hidden for so long, why you walked through private trials, why you endured years of misunderstanding, because the oil on your life could not be poured out until it was pure. And now that it has been released, no mockery can touch it, no mouth can cancel it, no ego can override it. You stood still, and now the Spirit stands with you. That's why you feel so different inside. It's not pride, it's peace. The kind of peace that only comes after spiritual war has been won. And it has been won, not with volume, not with followers, but with alignment, with truth, with timing. This is more than a shift. It's a spiritual promotion. Heaven now trusts you with rooms that used to silence you. God is placing you in spaces where your very presence will unsettle darkness and comfort the wounded, not because you have something to prove, but because you have nothing to hide. This is what authority feels like. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to convince. It simply stands, and everything false begins to fall. Isaiah 50:7 declares, "Because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore have I set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame." You were not put to shame. You were elevated through fire. And now, the same people who expected your collapse must now witness your rise. That's why the silence shook the room more than any argument ever could. Because true authority is always recognized by those who once mocked it. This is your confirmation. The moment was not small. It was prophetic. It was seen in heaven. It was sealed by the Spirit. And now it will echo far beyond that room. If you know this word spoke directly to your spirit, type 333 in the comments. A divine number of establishment, agreement, and confirmation from heaven that what was mocked is now sealed. You walked away, covered in glory. No need to look back. No need to explain. No need to say a word. The same steps you took into that moment, quiet, unnoticed, ordinary, became the same steps heaven used to crown you in front of those who doubted your purpose. There was no lightning bolt, no angel descending from the sky. Just you, walking away from mockery with a peace that couldn't be touched, a stillness that couldn't be faked, and a presence that lingered long after you exited the room. Because when you walk under divine authority, you don't need a mic or a stage to be noticed. Your very silence speaks volumes. Your restraint becomes revelation, and your steps covered in obedience release the scent of glory behind you. That moment didn't just expose the mocker, it revealed you. It uncovered the vessel God had been hiding for such a time as this. You never had to shout. You never had to prove. All you had to do was show up, surrendered. And now, everything is different. Chosen one. You walked away without saying much, but heaven shouted over you in the Spirit, "This is my servant in whom I am well pleased." Not because of performance, but because of posture. Not because you defended yourself, but because you trusted him to defend you. That walk, simple as it was more than just an exit. It was an ascension. You left the ground floor. You rose in the unseen realm, and your spirit knows it. That's why you haven't felt the same since. That's why something in you feels like it's been loosed, like a pressure broke, like something invisible lifted. It did, because the weight you carried before, the weight of needing to be understood, to be accepted, to be vindicated, was taken by the one who says, "Vengeance is mine," and in return, he gave you rest. Not the kind that puts you to sleep, the kind that positions you to run. You didn't just walk away. You walked forward, forward into clarity, forward into purpose, forward into a level of authority that can no longer be hidden. You felt it in your spine, the way you held your head higher, not out of pride, but from the absence of shame. You were covered now, covered in glory, wrapped in honor, sealed in obedience. And all of it happened without fanfare, because true glory doesn't need attention, it draws it naturally. You carried something holy out of that moment, and it clung to your garments like incense in the folds of a priest's robe. You've become different now, not in a way that separates you with superiority, but in a way that sets you apart with weight, the kind of weight people feel before they even hear your voice, the kind of spiritual gravity that makes others think twice before speaking loosely around you. This is the beginning of a new season, one where your presence does more than fill a space, it defines it. And not because you want power, but because you've been entrusted with presence. What once was hidden is now being honored, not loudly, not publicly yet, but deeply. The shift has already begun. Even behind closed doors, they're whispering about it. They can't quite put it into words, but they know something happened. The one they overlooked now carries something they can't ignore, and no matter how much they try to pretend otherwise, your name will linger in their conversations, not because of the moment itself, but because of the afterglow. God uses unlikely moments to elevate unseen people, and He just did it again through you. You don't need to look for confirmation. You are the confirmation. Your stillness, your strength, your surrender, all of it is proof that something divine has rested on your life in a new way. They mocked what they didn't understand, but now they're sensing what they can't explain. This is the beginning of quiet honor, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but draws it, the kind that doesn't need spotlight, because God is your covering, the kind that doesn't fight for position, because favor has already made room. Proverbs 22, 11 declares, "One who loves a pure heart and who speaks with grace will have the king for a friend." And that's exactly what's happening now. Your grace just opened doors that talent never could. Your stillness just spoke louder than years of trying. Your obedience just qualified you for rooms your name has not yet been mentioned in, but your spirit has already entered. Let this moment settle into your bones. Let it affirm you, not in pride, but in peace. You have crossed through fire, and it did not consume you. It crowned you. Behind closed doors, they now speak your name, not out loud, not boldly, but in hushed tones, with eyes that shift, with voices that lower, because what they once overlooked, they now watch. What they once dismissed, they now discuss. It's not admiration yet. It's not full understanding, but it's awareness. The same ones who once joked now sense the weight. They don't say it to your face, but in meetings, in messages, in side conversations, they mention you. Not because you forced your way into relevance, but because the moment you carried couldn't be forgotten. There's something undeniable about obedience. It leaves a residue, a fragrance, and once someone has encountered it, they can't unsmell the smoke of God's fire. You walked away with no rebuttal, nor justification, nor drama, and yet your silence filled the space long after your footsteps faded. Now the mocker is quiet, and those who laughed with him, they're no longer laughing. Some are uneasy, some are curious, a few are convicted, but all are changed. Because when someone is truly chosen, when the presence of God marks them publicly, people notice, whether they admit it or not. This is the hidden ripple of glory. It travels farther than the moment. It reaches into people's memories. It stirs their conscience. And sometimes, it calls their own spirit back to alignment. You weren't just walking away in dignity. You were carrying an aroma of divine proof. And now, that fragrance lingers in the very places that once rejected you. They're beginning to see, not everything, but enough to recognize, you're not like them. You were never made for the middle. You were born to break through, to rise above, to live from a different well. And now that heaven has confirmed it, the evidence is quietly working in your favor. Do not be surprised when conversations begin to open, not because someone suddenly believes in you, but because the Spirit has arrested their attention. God has a way of using moments to shift mindsets, not to validate your pride, but to fulfill His pattern. Because when He prepares a table, He doesn't remove your enemies. He seats them nearby, so they can witness the unfolding of what they once mocked. And this is part of your table. They're starting to see the preparation. They can't stop it. They can't explain it, but they sense it. In the same way, Joseph's brothers could not recognize his elevation, but could not deny his authority. In the same way, Daniel's enemies couldn't find fault, but couldn't escape the favor. In the same way, Esther was once just another face in the palace, until favor made her name echo in the king's chambers. That's the power of divine reversal. You don't need a platform to be seen. You don't need a spotlight to be noticed. You only need His voice. And that voice has already spoken over you. Now your name is moving ahead of you, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say. You let God speak. You let Him shut the mouth of mockery. And now He is causing others to remember you without you having to remind them. Some are confused. Some are quietly watching. But a few, they're beginning to respect the grace you carry. They saw how you handled the moment, and that moment spoke volumes. It told them, you are not unstable. You are not emotional. You are governed by something higher, by someone holy. And that realization is now echoing in the places you once felt invisible. It's no longer about whether they like you. It's about the weight of what they witnessed, and that weight is working for you now. Not because you chased recognition, but because you stewarded a moment. Heaven trusted you with. Ecclesiastes 3:14 says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear Him. And that's what they feel now, reverence, not for you, but for what moves through you. Because that moment wasn't ordinary, and neither are you. You are now being watched in a new way, studied, considered, whispered about. Because glory never leaves a place untouched, and your obedience left a mark that no one can deny. Let the whispers continue. Let the rooms fill with quiet recollection. You don't need to enter again with fire. The first flame was enough. You're no longer the underdog. You've crossed a line, and now you can feel it in your spirit. Something has shifted, not just in how they see you, but in how heaven sees fit to move through you. The one they once overlooked, the one they laughed at, the one they dismissed, is now the one carrying something too heavy to be denied. And it wasn't because you proved them wrong. It was because you stayed aligned. You didn't argue for your place. You let God assign it. Now favor is speaking louder than your voice ever could. The ones who mocked, they're silent. The ones who watched, they're stirred. And the ones who doubted, they're beginning to wonder. This is what divine reversal looks like. You don't climb the ladder they watch, as God lifts you in front of them. And He's not doing it for your pride. He's doing it because you passed the test. That moment of public mockery was a setup, a furnace moment, a fiery opportunity to bow to pressure or stand for presence. And you chose presence. That's why you're rising. Not by strategy, not by charisma, but by glory. Now, the conversations that once excluded you, they need your wisdom. The rooms that once ignored you, they pause when you enter. The voices that once belittled you, they wait to hear what you'll say next. You've become a spiritual disruptor, not because you tried to shake things up, but because your obedience brought something into the room that hadn't been felt in a long time. And when something holy enters the familiar, everything has to adjust. Chosen one. You have no idea how rare your restraint is. Most people react, but you reverenced. And that reverence became your invitation to the next level. You didn't win an argument. You demonstrated a kingdom. You didn't prove a point. You revealed a presence. And now, heaven has made room for you, not just on platforms but in people's spirits. You are now a voice that carries authority, even when you whisper. That's what true elevation looks like. It doesn't boast. It simply becomes undeniable. They may never say it to your face, but they feel it. They feel the change. They feel the difference. They feel the fear of the Lord that now rests on you. And that's what they're responding to. Some are drawn to it. Some are disturbed by it. But none can ignore it. You've become the one who shifts a room simply by entering it. Because your identity is no longer defined by how they once treated you. It's defined by the oil you carry now. This is why the warfare has been so personal. Why the mocking was so public. Because the reversal was meant to be undeniable. And now it is. Let them remember the laughter. Let them recall their sarcasm. Because in the end, what they laughed at has now become what they can't escape. The power of God doesn't need to humiliate others to glorify you. It simply elevates you enough that the contrast speaks for itself. It's happening right now. In subtle ways. In conversations you're not even a part of. In decisions that are being made where your name is suddenly brought up as a solution. This is the rise that no spotlight could fabricate. This is the lifting that only obedience unlocks. Psalm 3:3 says, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high." And that's exactly what He's done. You didn't have to force your way up. He lifted you. You didn't make the room shake. His presence in you did. You didn't silence the mocker. His Spirit did. And now, what's on your life demands attention, not because it's loud, but because it's real. Stay humble. Stay still. Stay set apart. Because this elevation is not about applause. It's about assignment. And your assignment is expanding. There will be more rooms, more voice, more weight, but also more glory and greater grace. You didn't just pass a test. You've been handed a mantle. The same grace that covered your silence now covers your voice. The same authority that shut down mockery is now unlocking purpose. And with that comes a choice to carry this with integrity, to walk in the new without despising those who are still in the old, to move in power, but stay rooted in posture. If this message stirred something deep within you, don't let it go to waste. Click like to keep this word flowing. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that silence in obedience is never weakness, it's strategy. Subscribe if you haven't already. Don't miss what God continues to reveal through these prophetic moments. And if this has been a blessing to you and you feel led, consider supporting this work. Every seed helps these messages go further and reach more of God's hidden warriors. Your obedience fuels the mission. And if you know heaven just confirmed something inside you, comment below. I choose glory. Just 3 words. But when spoken in agreement with God's timing, they open the way for Him to do what no human favor ever could. You were tested by fire, not just words. People saw the exchange and thought it was about a moment, just another confrontation, just another room, just another clash of egos. But it wasn't ego that met you in that space. It was trial by flame. And not everyone survives fire. Chosen one. The test was never about your wit. It wasn't about proving you're right. It was about what you'd do under pressure. It was about who you'd become when squeezed. Would you lash out to reclaim your image? Would you shrink to preserve peace? Or would you remain anchored in the unseen, letting God fight battles you could have won in your flesh, but chose to surrender in your spirit? You already know which one you chose, and now you understand why the enemy fought so hard to provoke you. He wasn't just trying to make you angry, he was trying to break your posture, because posture in pressure reveals identity. And you revealed a person who has already died to self. You didn't move in self-preservation. You moved in spiritual restraint. And that restraint, it wasn't passive. It was power under control. The enemy was hoping you'd disqualify yourself, that your response would forfeit your reach. But you didn't flinch. You stood still, and you passed the test by fire. Because this moment wasn't just a verbal attack, it was a spiritual temperature check. The heat rose, the tension peaked, and instead of exploding, you were refined. There's something about people who have walked through the flame and refused to bow. They come out looking the same to the crowd, but in the spirit, they are changed forever. You don't carry the scent of the fire. You carry the oil of having survived it. You didn't argue because your identity isn't built on applause. You didn't defend yourself because your calling isn't rooted in their understanding. And you didn't retaliate because you were busy being transformed. This is the hidden process God brings His chosen through, not always visible, rarely celebrated, but deeply sacred. You may not have realized it in the moment, but that confrontation was crafted as a furnace, a spiritual proving ground, a place where heaven said, "Let's see what's inside them now." And what emerged was someone who is no longer trying to earn authority, but someone who walks in it naturally, not because of charisma, not because of title, but because of consecration, the kind of consecration that doesn't need to announce itself, because the fire has already done the refining. You now carry something few ever get to carry: fire-tested faith, glory that didn't come through gifts, but through pain, authority that wasn't built in crowds but in crushing. And this is why things feel different now, why people look at you longer, why spaces feel smaller when you enter them. It's because something in you has grown. Not visibly, not dramatically, but spiritually. You're no longer trying to prove you're chosen. You're simply living as if you are. And heaven is confirming it, step by step. This test wasn't just about what you'd say, It was about whether or not your spirit was mature enough to hold what's coming next. And now that you've passed it, doors are opening, not out of favor alone, but out of refinement, because God doesn't give untested vessels real authority. He gives it to those who have chosen submission over survival, to those who have allowed the fire to make them whole, not bitter. And that's you, now. You've gone through something many never do. You've been mocked publicly, pressed emotionally, tempted spiritually, and you emerged clean. There is no smoke on you. There is no residue of resentment, only the scent of obedience. Daniel didn't come out of the lion's den angry at the king. The 3 Hebrew boys didn't come out of the fire angry at Babylon. And you've come out of this trial not holding ashes, but carrying evidence that God walks with you. Psalm 66, 10-12, A's. For you, God, tested us. You refined us like silver. We went through fire and water, but you brought us to a place of abundance. And that's what this is. A turning point from trial to abundance. Not just in things, but in clarity, in identity, in calling, in confidence. The fire was necessary, and it worked. And now, you walk into rooms with more than words. You walk in with weight. Not everyone will know why they feel it, but they will feel it. And the ones heaven has assigned to your voice, they'll recognize the flame and follow it. You've passed through the test. You've earned nothing. You've inherited everything, and nothing will ever be the same again. This wasn't just a clapback, it was a prophecy fulfilled from the beginning, long before the mocker opened his mouth, long before the crowd gathered, long before your name was ever spoken in that space. This moment had already been written. What you walked through was not random. It was scheduled. Heaven had already marked the confrontation, the silence, the shift, and the rise. And what looked like humiliation to the world was actually activation in the spirit. You didn't respond with anger because the Spirit had already settled you. You didn't lower yourself because God had already lifted you. And when you spoke, it wasn't from ego, it was from eternity. Those weren't just words, they were fulfillment. They were proof that every dark season, every closed door, every night you questioned your worth, was leading to something holy. You've been carrying a prophecy inside you for years. Even when you couldn't name it, you felt it. A quiet fire that wouldn't go out. A weight in your soul that didn't match your surroundings. You were never just getting by. You were growing in silence. And now, the silence has spoken. Chosen one. This wasn't a reaction. It was a revealing, not just of your authority, but of your identity. The enemy didn't mock you for who you were. He mocked you for who you were becoming. Because even darkness says destiny. Even demons can smell deliverance when it's near. And so the mocker was sent, not as a coincidence, as a confirmation, a final checkpoint before the next level of your assignment could be unlocked. He was never your enemy. He was your mirror. God used him to show you how far you've come, how much restraint you now walk in, how much fire you carry without needing to prove it. You didn't just pass a test. You fulfilled a word, spoken over you in secret, spoken when no one else believed, spoken when you were still wrestling with insecurity, with silence, with shame. But God knew, and He remembered every hidden sacrifice, every time you chose to obey in the dark, every moment you wanted to lash out, but chose stillness instead. You were becoming this voice, this weight, this presence, This proof that God really does raise up the rejected, that He really does anoint the overlooked, that He really does lift the lowly and crown them with glory. What you walked through wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, and not just of your image, but of your purpose. Because now, the mantle you carry fits. Now, the room you're in responds to your presence, not because they understand it, but because they recognize what lives in you. This is why the mockery came, to try and stop the unveiling, to trap you in your old self, to drag you into flesh right before you were meant to step into fullness. But you didn't take the bait. You stayed in posture, and heaven moved. They thought it was a clapback. But what came out of you was scripture in motion. It was an old word, dressed in a new vessel. And that vessel was you. You didn't ask to be chosen, but chosen you are. Not because you wanted the spotlight, but because you said yes in the silence. And now the silence has produced fire. What was meant to break you has become the banner over you. What was meant to crush your confidence has become your crown. And what was meant to silence your purpose has become its loudest witness. There's no going back now. Not to hiding, not to shrinking, not to second-guessing what God has already confirmed. From this point on, you walk as one who has been proven, not by men, by fire. And heaven trusts what you've become in the fire. You carry too much to explain, too much to package, but it will be felt wherever you go. Because prophecy fulfilled doesn't need to convince anyone, it just stands. And the fruit speaks for itself. This is what oil under pressure becomes. This is what obedience produces. This is what happens when a soul refuses to bow to mockery and instead waits for heaven's cue. You are no longer reacting. You are reigning. Quietly, boldly, faithfully. And they will never forget it. Because the moment may pass, but the mark remains. You have become the evidence, and the proof will only grow. Word count. Arshawu. Win down. Final 300 words. Chosen one. You made it. Not just through the message, but through the fire. And the fact that you're still standing is evidence enough that you were never ordinary. This was never about a single moment of confrontation. It was always about the making of a voice, the refining of a vessel, the fulfillment of a promise. Let everything you've walked through remind you. Heaven does not forget. God sees. God hears. God lifts. In His time. In His way. You were never mocked because you were weak. You were mocked because you were marked. And the mark remains. Glory has settled on you. So walk forward now, not with the weight of proving anything to anyone, but with the peace that comes from knowing who walks with you, the same God who silenced the mocker, who honored your silence, who turned the room around with one moment of alignment. He goes with you into every next place. You are unshakable. You are unbreakable. You are chosen for this exact hour. This moment didn't just change the room, it changed you. And that change cannot be undone. Step into the fullness. Walk in the weight. Carry the fire. You are no longer hiding. You are no longer hoping. You are now here. Ready. Refined. And revealed. Chosen one. If you've made it this far, it's not by chance. This wasn't just another message. This was a divine encounter. A holy reminder that you are not forgotten, not invisible, not overlooked. You are marked, and now, revealed. What was meant to humiliate you became the door to elevation. The mocker thought they had the final word, but God wrote the final scene. And you walked out of it not bitter but crowned, not ashamed but anointed. Now, you carry something no critic can cancel and no crowd can control: the evidence of endurance. That's why you're feeling the shift, not in your feelings, but in your foundation. You've been refined, and it shows. Let this message be more than encouragement. Let it be confirmation that you are now moving differently because heaven is moving through you. If this word spoke to something deep inside you, don't scroll past it. Click like, not for me, but to keep the anointing moving forward. Share this with someone who's been misunderstood in their silence. Subscribe if you know more moments like this are meant for you. And if you feel led, you can sow into this work, because messages like this aren't just content, they are assignments, and your seed helps carry it further. Lastly, speak it aloud in the comments. I will not shrink. Declare it with your fingers. Affirm it with your heart. You are not shrinking to fit where you've outgrown. You are stepping fully into where God has always called you. You are chosen. You are ready. You are walking in glory, and this is just the beginning.